In June of 2014, an attorney sat down in a quiet office in Brattleboro, Vermont, to open the estate documents of a man named Ronald Read. The man had spent his life pumping gas and sweeping floors. He drove an old car. He wore a coat held together with safety pins because he saw no reason to buy a new one. And when that attorney opened the documents in front of him, the number staring back at him was $8 million. Not 8,000. 8 million. From a janitor. From a man most of Brattleboro, Vermont, had walked past every single day without a second thought. If you have spent your life working hard, watching every dollar, wondering if any of it would ever truly add up to something, stop what you are doing right now. Because Ronald Read was not lucky. He did not inherit this money. He did not win it. For nearly 70 years, while the world looked right past him, he was quietly doing something so simple that almost nobody noticed, and so powerful that it would one day stop a nation in its tracks. He never told his neighbors. He never told his coworkers. He never told the people he worked beside every single day for decades. He carried this secret in complete silence, year after year, decade after decade, while living a life that looked, on the outside, like it belonged to a man who had nothing at all. What Ronald Read built was not just a fortune. It was proof. Proof that it does not matter how late you started, how little you earned, or how invisible your life feels right now. The $8 million was never the real story. The real story is what a man can quietly build when nobody is watching, and what that proves about the years you have left. By the time this story is over, you will never look at an ordinary life, including your own, the same way again. Before we go further into this story, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if stories like this move you, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss what we uncover next on the Silent Fortunes. Before we go any further, let us be clear about something. Ronald Read was not a businessman. He did not come from money. He did not inherit a single dollar from anyone. And he never started a company, never patented an idea, and never had a lucky break that handed him an advantage most working men never get. He woke up early. He went to work. He did the kind of jobs that nobody ever thanks you for, pumping gas in the cold, sweeping floors after everyone else had gone home. And he did it for decades without complaint, without recognition, and without a single person around him suspecting there was anything unusual about his life at all. So how does a man like that die with more money than most doctors, lawyers, and corporate executives will ever accumulate in their entire careers? What did Ronald Read understand about money, about time, about patience, that the rest of America has completely missed? And maybe the question that matters most of all, why did he never tell a single person what he was building? Not his neighbors, not his coworkers, not even most of his own family. Those three questions are the heart of everything you are about to hear. And by the time you have the answers, you may never look at your own quiet, ordinary life the same way again. Because the $8 million Ronald Read left behind was never the point. What he understood, and what he proved, runs much deeper than a number on a piece of paper. And it starts long before anyone knew his name. To understand what Ronald Read built, you have to go back to where he started. Ronald Read was born on October 23, 1921, in the small town of Dummerston, Vermont, a place so quiet and so small that most Americans have never heard its name and never will. He came into the world during the years leading into the Great Depression, in a family that understood hardship not as something you read about, but as something you lived every single day. As a boy, Ronald Read was the first in his family to hitchhike to school, simply because there was no other way to get there. No bus, no car, just a young boy standing on the side of a Vermont road, hoping someone would stop. That single detail tells you almost everything you need to know about where Ronald Read began, and the kind of quiet determination that life demanded from him before he was even old enough to understand what determination meant. When the Second World War came, Ronald Read served his country, seeing time overseas like so many young American men of his generation. And like so many of them, he came home and said very little about it. He did not come back asking for anything. He came back, rolled up his sleeves, and went straight to work. For years, Ronald Read pumped gas at the Haviland service station on Putney Road in Brattleboro, Vermont. Out in the cold, out in the rain, checking oil and cleaning windshields for the people of his town, day after day, year after year. When that chapter ended, Ronald Read did not stop. He took a job as a janitor at the local J.C. Penney, sweeping floors and cleaning bathrooms, doing the kind of work that most people walk past without ever once considering the man doing it. His personal life followed the same quiet rhythm. Ronald Read married a woman named Jeanette and helped raise her 2 children as his own, building a family life that was steady, modest, and largely invisible to the outside world. He lived in the same simple wood-frame house for most of his life. He drove an old Toyota Yaris that ran long after most people would have replaced it. He wore the same kind of plain clothes, ate the same kind of simple meals, and when his coat began to wear thin, Ronald Read did not go out and buy a new one. He pinned it together and kept wearing it, because in his world, you took care of what you had. When Jeanette passed away, Ronald Read continued on alone, in that same house, on that same quiet street, living the same life he had always lived. To anyone looking in from the outside, there was nothing here. No mystery, no secret, just an old man in Vermont, living the kind of life nobody writes stories about. But underneath that ordinary surface, something had been quietly happening for a very long time. Something Ronald Read had never told a single living soul. Here is what nobody in Brattleboro knew. Here is what the customers at the Haviland service station never knew, what the shoppers walking past him at J.C. Penney never knew, what even most of his own family never fully understood. Every single week, for decades, Ronald Read was quietly buying stocks. Not penny stocks. Not risky bets on companies that promised to make someone rich overnight. Ronald Read was buying shares in the kind of large, stable, American companies that most people walk past every day without ever once thinking about owning a piece of them. Companies like J.P. Morgan Chase, Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson, and Berkshire Hathaway. Names that sound boring. Names that do not make headlines. Names that, one share at a time, were quietly becoming the foundation of something extraordinary. He bought slowly. He bought carefully. And then he did something that most people find almost impossible to do. He held. When those companies paid dividends, Ronald Read did not take that money and spend it. He reinvested it, buying more shares, which paid more dividends, which bought more shares again. Year after year, decade after decade, that cycle repeated itself in complete silence, growing a little larger each time, the way a snowball grows as it rolls down a long, quiet hill. And while that snowball grew, Ronald Read did not change a single thing about how he lived. He did not buy a newer car. He did not move to a bigger house. He did not tell anyone what was happening. Think about everything Ronald Read lived through. The market crashes, the recessions, the years when newspapers were full of headlines telling Americans to get out, to sell, to protect themselves before it was too late. Ronald Read did none of that. He did not panic. He did not sell. While so many people around him were spending everything they earned, on new cars, on new furniture, on things that lost value the moment they were bought, Ronald Read kept doing the same quiet thing he had always done. He kept buying. He kept holding. And he kept saying absolutely nothing about any of it. Nobody around him had any idea what was quietly taking shape. And what Ronald Read was building in that silence was about to become something almost nobody in America would believe. What Ronald Read was doing was not complicated. It did not require a finance degree, a connection on Wall Street, or a lucky break most men never get. What Ronald Read was doing came down to 3 principles. 3 principles so simple that most people hear them and dismiss them, not because they do not work, but because they are slow. And in a world that sells speed, slow does not get talked about. But slow is exactly what built $8 million from a janitor's paycheck. The first principle was this: buy what you understand and hold it longer than feels comfortable. Ronald Read did not buy anything he could not explain. He bought companies that made things people used every single day: soap, medicine, banking, household goods. He understood that as long as Americans kept washing their hands and managing their money, those companies would keep going. He did not need to be clever. He needed to be right about something simple and then give it time. If you are watching this right now and you have ever felt like investing was too complicated for someone like you, Ronald Read is proof that it was never about being smart. It was about being patient with something simple. The second principle was this: live below your means and invest the difference every single time, without exception. Ronald Read did not wait until he had a large amount of money to start. He took whatever was left over after his basic needs were met, sometimes very little, and he put it to work. Every week. Without skipping. Without waiting for a better time. For the man watching this who feels like he is starting too small to matter, Ronald Read started smaller than almost anyone, and he never stopped. And the third principle, the one that separated Ronald Read from almost everyone else, was this. He never panicked. Markets fell. Recessions came. Headlines screamed that everything was about to collapse. And Ronald Read did not sell. He understood, on some quiet, instinctive level, that a falling market was not a disaster. It was a sale. While others were selling out of fear, Ronald Read kept buying, kept holding, kept saying nothing. If you are 35, 45, or 60 years old right now, wondering if it is too late to start something like this, it is not. Ronald Read's fortune was not built in one good year. It was built across an entire lifetime of small, ordinary decisions, repeated without interruption. And that is something every single person watching this can start today. On June 2nd, 2014, Ronald Read died in Brattleboro, Vermont, at the age of 92. His passing was met the way small towns mourn their own, quietly, gently, with the particular sadness reserved for someone who had simply always been there and was now suddenly gone. His funeral was modest. The people who attended were the people who had known him, old neighbors, former co-workers from the service station and from J.C. Penney, a handful of family members. Nobody walked into that funeral expecting anything unusual to follow. As far as anyone in Brattleboro knew, they were saying goodbye to a kind, quiet old man who had lived a small, simple life. And then the estate documents were filed. And the number written on those documents, $8 million, began moving through Brattleboro the way electricity moves through a wire. $8 million. From the man who pumped their gas. From the man who swept the floors at J.C. Penney. From the man who drove the old Yaris and pinned his coat together rather than buy a new one. People who had known Ronald Read for decades sat with that number and simply could not make it make sense. Within days, the story was no longer just Brattleboro's. The New York Times picked it up. Financial publications across the country picked it up. Ronald Read's face, gentle, plain, completely unremarkable, appeared on screens from coast to coast. And the reaction from people across America was not just surprise. It was something deeper. It was recognition. Because somewhere inside every person who heard Ronald Read's story was a quiet voice that whispered, I could have done that. I should have done that. Maybe it is not too late to do that. But here is the part of Ronald Read's story that matters most. The $8 million was never really about the $8 million. Ronald Read left $6 million to the Brooks Memorial Library in Brattleboro, a library he had spent countless quiet hours inside throughout his life. He left $1.2 million to Brattleboro Memorial Hospital. He left smaller amounts to the stepchildren he had helped raise and to the people who had been close to him. Ronald Read had spent his entire life living like a man who had nothing. And in the end, he gave more back to his community than almost anyone in that town ever had. He did not build this fortune to prove anything to anyone. He built it in silence, and then he gave it away to the places that had quietly given his own life meaning. So what do we take from the life of Ronald Read? What are the silent fortunes hidden inside this quiet, ordinary, extraordinary story? There are three. And if you take nothing else from this video, take these. The first silent fortune in Ronald Read's story is this. Wealth is not about how much you earn. It is about how much you keep and how long you keep it working for you. Ronald Read never earned a large salary. He never had a windfall. He never had a bonus that changed everything overnight. But every single week, he kept a portion of what he earned, and he put it to work, and he let it keep working for nearly 70 years. Most people watching this earn more in a month than Ronald Read earned in some years of his life. The difference was never income. The difference was what he did with it, and for how long. The second silent fortune is this. Time in the market beats timing the market. Ronald Read never tried to be clever. He never tried to guess when to buy or when to sell. He bought solid companies, and he held them through everything, through crashes, through recessions, through years when the headlines told everyone to run. He understood, without ever needing to say it out loud, that the most damaging thing an investor can do is interrupt the process. Every time someone sells in fear, they reset the clock back to zero. Ronald Read never reset his clock. He let it run, quietly, for almost 70 years. And 70 years of quiet, uninterrupted growth turned a janitor's modest paycheck into $8 million. And the third silent fortune, the one most people never talk about, is this. Ronald Read proved that an ordinary life, lived with extraordinary consistency, is more powerful than an extraordinary life, lived with ordinary consistency. He had no advantages. He had no special opportunities. He was a man who pumped gas and swept floors in a small Vermont town, who decided, quietly, decades ago, that he would live on less than he earned and invest the rest and never stop. That single decision, repeated week after week, decade after decade, without anyone ever knowing, became $8 million and a legacy that outlived him. If you are 35 years old watching this right now, you have time. If you are 50, you have time. If you are 62, you have time. Ronald Read started with nothing extraordinary at all. He started exactly where you are. The only thing that separated his life from anyone else's was the decision he made, quietly and never abandoned, to start, to stay consistent, and to trust the process even when nobody around him could see what he was building. Ronald Read never told a single person what he was building. Not his neighbors, not his coworkers, not the customers he served for decades at the Haviland service station on Putney Road. He carried this in complete silence for nearly 70 years. So here is the question I want to leave you with today, and I want you to answer it honestly in the comments below. Would you have had the patience to do what Ronald Read did? To live modestly, invest consistently, and trust the process completely for decades, without ever seeing the dramatic results that most people need to stay motivated? Be honest with yourself. Tell me in the comments. If Ronald Read's story moved you, if it gave you something real, a lesson, a perspective, a reason to look at your own life a little differently, then you already know what to do next. Subscribe to The Silent Fortunes, because every single week, we come back here and uncover another story the world forgot to tell. And next week, we are going back to 1964, to a parking lot in Salt Lake City, where a 62-year-old man sat alone in his car with $105 in Social Security money, a pressure cooker in the back seat, and a chicken recipe that the entire world had already told him was worthless. What that man did next would become one of the most recognized brands in the history of American business. And the real story, the one nobody has ever fully told, is coming next on The Silent Fortunes.